Well, I want to start with a question, and here it is. What if nonprofit leaders view donors not just as givers, but as investors expecting returns? Well, my name is Dr. Randy Dirks, and I am the host of Funding Your Future Now podcast. This is designed for nonprofit people. They could be in the C suite, they could be fundraising executives, but the whole gamut of the nonprofit world. And today I have Pete Ochs with me. And Pete has spent the last 4 decades, I guess we could say, as the president and now the chairman of Capital 3. And that is investing enterprise focusing on creating economic, social, and spiritual capital in private companies. And he'll explore that in a moment. But Pete, what a delight to have you here today. And if you would just introduce yourself to our audience, that would be wonderful.
You bet. Well, Randy, thanks for having me. I'm a Kansas farm kid, grew up and went to college and was going to be a dentist and took a business class and figured out I was really a business guy and not a dentist. And so I jumped into the business world, got out of college, took a job with a commercial bank in Wichita, Kansas, did that for 8 years, had an entrepreneurial itch, and at the age of 30 started my own investment banking company where we represented the buyer of companies. And so from 1982 to 2000, just about 2000, we spent 20 years in the investment banking business helping people buy companies. In the middle of that, we wound up actually buying a company or two ourselves. Those grew. And then in 2000, we decided we'd exit the investment banking business and just focus on this portfolio of companies that we were running. So from really about 2000 till today, we've run a portfolio of privately held companies in various kinds of industries. And I was very involved in that up until 2018. At 2018, I turned the stewardship of those companies over to my son, and I stepped out of the business. And I spent the last 6 or 7 years really coaching young business people on how to run a business that would create economic, social, and spiritual impact. So that's what I've been doing, and I'm having the time of my life.
Oh, that's great. And what a joy to have your son working with you, too. That's pretty special. You know, Pete, you're going to bring a real unique slant to what we're going to look at today because of your business background. You know, often in the nonprofit world, we think of social impact, and we tend to focus more on that. And certainly there are some nonprofits out there that have a spiritual impact. But you bring all three together, and I think it's quite a unique blend when you talk economic, social, and spiritual capital working together. But here's a question. You know, many nonprofit presidents focus heavily on the social, or maybe for some on the spiritual, but struggle with financial sustainability. So how would you advise a nonprofit leader to think about balancing all three forms of capital in their organization? What would that look like?
Yes. Well, I think we start with what does it take to make an organization or an enterprise successful? And you really have to have three things. You have to have some money, you have to have a great program, and I think you have to have principles that drive the organization. And that's where we come up with this concept of economic, social, and spiritual capital. So it's easy, I think. I had the unique experience of starting a nonprofit 31 years ago. It was actually a Christian high school.
Okay.
And let me tell you, I was a business guy and I got in the nonprofit world, and it is different. But I will tell you, I really believe that the difference between, in some sense, a nonprofit and a for-profit, one pays taxes and one doesn't.
Okay.
And in some sense, the principles and how you run that organization, that enterprise is really no different. And you need those three things. You need to have
Sure.
money, you need to have customers or a product, and you need to have principles to run it by. So I think oftentimes nonprofits think like a lot of businesses, I'll just open the doors and we're going to have such a great product and offer such great service that customers will automatically come to us, and donors will they'll see what great work we're doing and they'll just start flooding us with money.
Oh, for sure. That happens all the time, doesn't it?
It happens all the time. And unfortunately, I'm sure it happens once in a while, but most of the
Yeah.
time it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, for sure. I hear you.
And Randy, I think maybe the reason we don't think about customers in nonprofits is we're so focused on the beneficiary. So I'm going to ask this question. Who really is your customer in a nonprofit organization? I'm going to make the case that I believe it's the donor. And here's the reason I say it's the donor. I believe a customer is the person who writes you a check.
Sure.
By definition, that's the customer, okay? Now, oftentimes I think in a nonprofit we would view the beneficiary of whatever service we're offering as the customer. No, I think they're the beneficiary. So when you get this different approach and say the customer is really the person who writes the check, then I think it forces us to give much more thought to how we go about uh, donor care and feeding, as it were. And
Mhm.
if that donor is really a customer, he is expecting something in return for that investment. And while it's not going to be a personal return, it's going to be a good return for the beneficiary. It's going to be lots of good work that is seen as a beneficiary. So I think number one, think of your donor as a customer who's writing a check and you need to provide him a return. And that return is going to be a really good service that you provide your beneficiaries.
I think you've hit on a very, very important point that often in nonprofits we don't really fully appreciate. I've said it sometimes that whether in the for-profit and your clients and your customers or in the nonprofit, your donors, in many ways they're really the heroes of the story and need to be
Exactly.
treated that way. And I think that's sort of what you were saying. So thank you for articulating the way you did. Well, let's explore that a little further and look at what we could call donors as investors. You approach investment with a focus on creating value across multiple dimensions. How should fundraising executives think differently about their donor relationships if they view donors not just as givers? Obviously, they do, but as investors expecting return. You talk about economic, social, and the value side. So maybe go a little bit deeper into what that would look like.
Yes. So if I'm an investor, by definition, I'm expecting a return. And so I want to get a return on my money that I'm investing. And typically that's going to be come out in the form of either social or spiritual impact one way or another. So I think what you need to do is really think through how can we show our investor the return that they're getting for the money they invest? And as I look at, a number of ministries out there, a number of nonprofits out there, I think there are ways, and it's actually becoming, I think, a trend where we're trying to measure economic, social, and spiritual impact, and particularly socially and spiritually. And those things are very difficult to measure. One of the things that we do, and we're involved in a number of nonprofits, economically in a business, it's easy to measure the economic output. It's the net operating income of a business. Okay. So you can
Sure.
say, if we invest X amount of money and we get this return, this is the return. What we do for our investors in nonprofits that we're associated with, we really show them it's sometimes often difficult to see the impact that you're having, either socially or spiritually, in an enterprise or in a nonprofit. So what we'll oftentimes do is we measure the outputs economically. In a business, it's the net operating income, but in our nonprofit, we measure the inputs that we put in to what we're doing, and we say to the investor, the donor, as it were, this is what we're going to do. So we make promises that we're going to do A, B, C, and D, and we show that to them. And if we have a good plan, and if we show them that we're taking their money and the inputs that we're putting in we're getting a lot of bang for the buck for the inputs that we put into the nonprofit, then the outputs, if your inputs are good, you're going to get outputs that are maybe not measurable by a specific number, but you're going to get lots of stories, and you actually will get some really good outputs. Um, I will give you an example. We happen to run a business in a maximum security prison, but we also have a nonprofit that is associated with that. And that nonprofit comes along and it provides lots of help for residents of this maximum security prison.
Okay.
They have no money, they have no friends, and they don't have a lot of purpose in life. And so what we do is we give them a good job economically, but what we do in that nonprofit is we come along and we help them socially and we help them what we call spiritually. We give them a purpose for living, as it were. Now, we put measurements. We know that we're going to do these kinds of things. We have offer them 15,000 hours of training in all kinds of things at no cost. They can get a degree in entrepreneurship. They can become a black belt in lean manufacturing. They can actually get a seminary degree.
Oh
Okay.
my
These are
goodness.
inputs, and
Sure.
it costs us money to do this. But you can see one of the outputs that we see is our recidivism rate for the men going through our program. Recidivism rate is the rate that men go back to prison. In the nation, it's 70%. In our nonprofit, it's 7%.
My goodness.
So you can
Wow.
see, and we look at the dollars that we reinvest, and then we see we're 1/10. We have one tenth of the men go back to prison that come through our program is in a normal program. And then you start calculating that or multiplying that at 30,000 a year that it takes to house a resident of a maximum security prison. You can start an investor can start seeing the return. And
Yes.
while it's not direct, I think those kinds of analyses are really good, and you need to go to that effort and show an investor and a donor, as it were, what that return is. I think it also forces you to have a much better business plan in your nonprofit.
What a story working in a prison and seeing literally people being given a new life, a new
Yes.
opportunity. That is great. I love the distinction you made between inputs and outputs. And so, from my frame of reference, inputs could be the people, the programs, the various activities that are planned. And then the outputs are the change, the
Yeah.
impact, the difference that that also can be measured. And I think sometimes that's important for nonprofits to be looking at. Yeah, we fed X number of people, or we built so many homes. Those are good. But if we can dig a little deeper and start seeing the transformation and change that happen in people's lives, that's getting a little bit more into the value side. I appreciate the distinction you've made there. So valuable.
And
Well, let's look at,
I do think you can
yeah,
actually
go right ahead.
I do think you can actually come up with some numbers with regards to the return on investment. But I also think oftentimes nonprofits miss the stories, and the
Yes,
stories are really the output, and the stories are the change in people, the change that's happened in people because of what that nonprofit has been doing.
absolutely. That's good. We're going to talk about what we maybe could refer to as the sane sustainability trap. And you said ministry without economic sustainability is not viable. So here's a question that is based upon that statement. What are the warning signs that a nonprofit president should watch for that indicate their organization is sacrificing what we could say long-term economic health for short-term mission impact? So they're sacrificing something, economic health. They say, well, we're getting mission impact now. What would indicate that that's taking place?
Yes, I think part of it is if in your plan, part of what you have to do is say, not only are we going to serve people, but we're also going to serve donors. Okay. And so if
Okay.
you haven't allocated enough of a budget if you haven't allocated enough time, talent, and treasure for donor care and involvement and education, that's going to be my first flag. If all I'm focused on 100% is helping my beneficiary, but I'm really not spending time, really, in some sense, helping and serving my donor, my investor. I see that as a red flag. I see another thing in the operating budget. If you don't have a cushion in there as an investor or a donor in a nonprofit, one of the things I always want to make sure is that do they have a bit of a cushion so if COVID hits or if something goes wrong and things change, can they sustain themselves? So I
Sure.
think to have a cushion and a reserve, a cash reserve in the business is really an important thing as well. Randy, I think also maybe if you start to see mission drift,
Okay.
and if you start to see drift in the nonprofit, in other words, so many people who run a nonprofit care so much about people that they're always seeing another need that they can serve, another
Oh, for
place
sure.
where they can provide. So oftentimes They think, well, we'll do this. And we often joke about hope not being a plan. They think, well, if we just serve these people, people will once again see what good things we're doing and they'll
Yeah,
start flooding us with money. And so
sure.
I think mission drift on what services you begin to offer in addition to what you're really doing is a big red flag for me, is a real red flag for me. I also would say we like to make sure that whenever we give to a nonprofit that we're not a major that one donor is not just a major piece of their fundraising
Oh, sure.
cap table, as it were. You want to have lots of investors and you don't want that ministry or that nonprofit to be at risk because one donor pulls out for whatever reason.
I just love everything you've been saying there. I want to pick up just on one area, and that's the whole matter. I want to use the term, maybe it's not used a lot in the nonprofit world, but the care for people. Obviously, we care for the recipients, but what about the care for, like you said, the donors or the investors? And I know we have to be a little cautious here, but those investors, they've got families, they've got lives, they've got occupations. They're dealing with a lot. And if we just limit our interaction with them to sort of like a transaction, as opposed to the holistic aspect of that person's life, let's say a relative ends up in the hospital and they're really in a difficult time. What about if I just went and visited that person in the hospital and let them know, hey, I care for you, I care for your family. I think that's really cements the relationship. And I think that's an area we need to look at much more in the nonprofit world, is treating people with dignity and respect. And so you've highlighted some very important things there.
Yeah. I think that point that you just made is probably, in my mind, maybe the most important point in what we call the care and feeding of our donors. Look, all of us that have excess wealth that we are able to invest into a nonprofit, why are we doing that? Because in some sense, it's our legacy. It's that intangible, non-transactional, transcendental thing that transcendental benefit that we get out of helping someone else. And as a nonprofit, if you can come along and cast vision and provide that true transformational, non-transactional, transcendental benefit to
Hmm.
that donor, that is a powerful thing. I think you hit the nail on the head right there.
Yeah. Well, let's jump to another area. We're going to call it measuring what matters. And in your investment world, you measure success across three distinct types of capital. We have already looked at that. And if a fundraising executive came to you and said, "We're hitting our dollar goals, we're getting the revenue, but something feels off," what questions would you ask them to help diagnose whether they're truly creating value or just raising money?
Yes, I think two things there. One is to go back, and I think definitely they're missing something on the social or spiritual impact piece. So they're not hitting their numbers there, and they know that. So they need to go back to their plan and say, is our plan really the right plan? Are we missing something? And a nonprofit is no different than a business. We can come up with a product that we think is just going to crush the market, but
Sure.
when we enter the market, it doesn't do so well. And so the same thing, we have a product as nonprofit folks, and we're offering it to people. And if people aren't taking advantage of it, then we may need to tweak our program. We may need to tweak our product, as it were. And so I think that's really important. I also think what creates all of that, oftentimes, we have this saying that principles define people, people determine practices, and practices determine performance. And
Mhm.
so I'm going to go to if you're not hitting your social, spiritual things, if your practices aren't working, then maybe it's because your people aren't performing in your nonprofit, and your people may not be performing because you haven't inculcated the principles and the values into that nonprofit that you should have. All you're worried about is the transactional money, and you're
Yes.
not worried about the transformational impact that starts with principles. We like to say, I always used to think that principles and values were one and the same. But over the last couple of years, I've come to believe there's a difference. I believe principles are these transcendent truths that you should run your business by. I believe values are really what you value. In our particular business and in the nonprofits that we're associated with, we really have four principles that we talk about: honor God, serve people, pursue excellence, and steward resources. And anytime we start getting out of whack just a little bit, we go back, and it's probably because we're not living up to those espoused principles.
Mhm.
Now, the values, in some sense, I believe the principles are the roots that I just said: honor God, serve people, be excellent, be a good steward. And values are the fruits. That would be integrity, that would be character, that would be commitment, that'd be those kinds of things. So I'm really, when I think this mission drift or this drift from our values is oftentimes when we get this feeling things aren't quite going right, it's because we've drifted from our principles.
For sure. I want to pick up on a comment you made, this whole issue of just seeing a transaction, seeing dollars come in. The way the nonprofit leaders treat their staff, treat their employees, and that comes
Yes.
into the values, is really going to be reflective of how they'll probably start treating their investors, their
Yes.
donors. They really do work together. And so I think that's a great point that you brought out. Well, I'm going to conclude with what I call the Fast Five, and these have nothing to do with your ventures, but more with just who you are as a person. So here's the first question, Pete. What is the best piece, or maybe one of the best pieces of professional advice you ever received?
Oh boy. Here's what I would tell you. I read a book when I was 25 and it said you need to do two things. You need to write a personal plan and you need to find a mentor. And I think particularly for young people, that would that is the best advice that I've gotten, because by doing both of those, very quickly after reading that book, I wrote my first personal plan, which really
Mm.
changed the course of my life because it made me think about the future. It made me think 10, 20, 30, 40 years out.
Oh,
So that
yeah.
was really important. But the second thing is I found a couple of mentors. One walked with me for 40 years and one walked with me for 45 years. And
Oh,
I did not make a major decision in life without asking them,
oh,
and
yeah.
they saved me so much heartache in life and just gave me such great wisdom that finding a mentor is, I think, would be a good mentor
Yeah.
that you can associate with. I think that would be the best advice I could give.
So valuable. Appreciate it. Well, second question. What's one daily habit you cannot live without?
Yes. This probably goes back actually to the annual plan. So I'm a big believer that you need to write an annual plan, and once you write that annual plan, then I believe there's a second habit. There's actually three habits. One is the annual plan. The second is what I would call my weekly strategy. So on Sunday night, I get my to-do list, I get my calendar, and I get my annual personal plan out, and I literally strategize my week saying, what can I do this week that will have the most impact this week and long term? So I'm actually doing some things that I have to do this week, but I'm also building in little pieces of things that will help me 20, 30, 40 years. And then that weekly strategy turns into what I call my daily execution.
Oh,
So to
sure.
your question, what is that daily thing? It's getting up first thing in the morning and going through my daily execution. And that's making sure I'm looking at what I'm going to do this day. It's also some time for me, because I'm a man of faith, I'm going to spend some time in God's word. I'm going to realign where I am in life. And so I think that's would be the most important thing I do. When I do that on a regular basis, my life is pretty good. When I don't,
Wow.
things starts to stutter a little bit.
Yeah, you feel that.
Yes.
Third question. What would be a bit of advice you'd give to your 20-year-old self? So imagine if you could turn the clock back and you're 20 years old, knowing what you know now, what would
Yes.
you say to that young man?
Yeah. So Randy, I think your 20s is what I would call your decade of searching.
Hmm.
I call 0 to 10 sprouting and 10 to 20 struggling, and I think your 20s are really searching,
Yeah.
and you're really searching for 3 things, 3 main things: your master, your mate, and your mission, okay?
Yes.
And I think 20-year-olds don't search enough. They kind of take what comes to them. They
Mhm.
don't say, who am I? How did
Yeah.
God create me? What am I really what really fires me up? What doesn't fire me up? What am I naturally gifted at? So I would search yourself and say, who am I? How did God create me? What am I really what are my natural talents? Then
Hmm.
I would start applying that towards what kind of a mate should I find? What kind of a mission should I be on? And who's going to be my ultimate master? And I think your master is really money or something greater than money. And if you can figure that out in your 20s, you're going to be well ahead of most folks.
Well, I sure like how you've laid that out. So valuable. Next question is if I'd like you to reflect on maybe what was a failure at one time, maybe not necessarily epic,
Yes.
but it actually ended up turning out to be a success
Yes.
once you move through that process.
Yes. So if your 20s was your decade of searching, I believe your 30s was your decade of pursuing success. And I think probably the greatest failure I made was my pursuit of success, of, let me put it this way, of worldly success, of really pursuing pride, pleasure, and possessions. Okay. I did that through my 30s. I worked hard. I worked too hard. My family probably sacrificed. There were just things that I was after pride, pleasure, and possessions for myself, and I didn't serve my family or others very well. And so I think, thankfully, through a very difficult time that happened and some very difficult experiences in business in my late 30s and early 40s, I came to understand that it really wasn't about success, but it was more about significance. And I think
Mhm.
ultimately it was really about surrender. And if you can move through your life, I think your these are the pursuit of success. I think your 40s, you wake up at, you're having this midlife crisis. You wake up and you said, I worked my tail off. I've got the nice house. I've got the nice car. I've got the nice title, but this isn't all about life.
For sure.
And then when you move to start, I think there's another searching during your 40s, and you want to do things that are more transformational than
Mm.
transactional, back to those words.
For sure.
But, for me, I think it's actually moving into your 50s. It's when you just kind of surrender yourself to a greater purpose and say,
Mhm.
life is much more about something, it's much greater than just me. And when you do that, you start to serve others. And
Yeah.
when you do that, life becomes very fulfilling. And so I think ultimately, and I think most of us have to go through that period of in our 30s of pursuing success and figuring out it's not all what it's cracked up to be. And then it starts this journey of moving on and really living for something greater than yourself.
Well, I think you've laid out the chapters to your book.
Yes.
I really love it. That's so enriching to hear you share those ideas. Well, here's the last question. What's your favorite place on earth to disconnect and recharge?
Yes. We actually live on a farm, and I will tell you, it's my farm. When I drive in the gate at the end of the day, it's just kind of like I'm in a different world, and I can get on the tractor, or I can go shoot some quail, or I can walk with my dog.
Hmm.
I can go mow the lawn, and it's just this, I think, getting back to simplicity.
Hmm.
I think the greatest thing I like about the farm is it brings me back to simplicity. It brings me back to the land and to earth.
Yeah.
It gets me a little closer to God, and so it's definitely my favorite places. It's a place I spend every day, but it's probably my favorite place.
Yeah. Well, now that you've used the word simplicity, I know you were using a number of words that started with S,
Yes.
success, significance. Maybe the last chapter in the book can be simplicity. How's that?
Yes.
And what does that really mean? You're not striving for so many other things, but you've really found yourself in things that are more simple, like you said.
Yes.
You're out mowing the lawn or you're on a walk or you're with some very special people in your life and there's just it's this simplicity of that brings so much meaning. Well, Pete, this has been so enriching, and I know people that are watching this, regardless of what age or what profession they're in, will be able to take something really of value and apply it in very practical ways. You've given us a lot of meat to think about as we navigate the nonprofit world and as we're leaders in that world. Well, I just love for you, in closing, for you just to share if people want to reach out to you, connect with you, what would be a way to do that?
You bet. The best way to reach me is Pete at the word enterprisestewardship.com. Pete at enterprisestewardship.com. And that's my email address, and I'll make sure that I get a response to you. So would love to visit with anyone who wants to go a little deeper.
Okay, well, thank you for doing that. Well, just want to let our guests know that my name is Dr. Randy Dirks, and this is Funding the Future Now podcast. And these podcasts come out on regular basis. We're just looking for ways that we can add value in very practical, tangible ways into the nonprofit world. So thanks for taking this in, and we look forward to you joining us in the future. Bye now. Okay, we have stopped. Well, that was quite a journey. I thoroughly enjoyed interacting with you. What I saw you initially on LinkedIn, and most of the people that I interview, you were involved with a nonprofit at some point, but most people are not. They're maybe marketers or
Yeah.
coaches or strategic planners, a wide variety. And you have, because of your business background, understanding that world, just really brought a lot, I think, of very insightful comments, helpful statements that people can. I like to say in life, if I've got some hooks that I
Yes.
can hang things on
Yes.
that give a direction, a purpose, a process, and they don't need to be a lot of hooks, maybe 3 to 5,
Yes.
then
Yeah.
that really is
I'm with you.
helpful, and you've done that, so thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me.
As it's a delight. We prayed in the beginning, but I'd love to pray for you at the end.
Yes.
And, how may I do that? What's, something maybe
Yeah.
business-wise, personal-wise, however it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think this was kind of my biggest prayer request. I'm 74 years old, and
Yeah.
I am my greatest fear in life is I run out of time before I finish what I want to do.
Okay.
And so I think my prayer is that I would, one, just be very comfortable where God has me, but
Mm,
yet at the same time would be very wise in how I spend my time.
yeah. Thank you. Well, I'm 73, I'll be 74 next month, so I'm sharing some things with you.
Exactly.
Well, love to pray for that. Well, Lord, thank you for Pete, his family. You know the desire of his heart to keep so in line with you, so sensitive to you, has sensitive to your voice, to know the directions you're moving him into. I do pray for longevity of life and quality of life and the ability to continue to speak into people's lives wherever they are and accomplish what you've set before him. I love the verse. We both love the verse that unto him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we ask or think. And also the verse that says, the good work you began in us, you will perfect it.
Mhm.
And so we're trusting in that for his life, for his
Mhm.
son, his children, his family. Just a season, a very important season of great meaning and joy. So refresh him in every way, I pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. How are you finding your 70s? Are
Oh, I
you
love it. I love
That's
it.
the best.
You
And
know,
I
I heard it
so
said one time,
so
and I
love to see you out here making a difference.
yeah. You know, I heard it said, and I wish I could remember where it came from. But the question was this: what's the most important decade in a person's life where they have the largest kind of, if you want to say, broader influence? And the answer was the 60s. You wouldn't think of it that way.
Yes.
And then the other question was the follow up: what's the second most important decade? And it's the
Yes. Yes.
And I think because of what you just mentioned earlier, you're being a coach just like those 2 gentlemen were to you. Now you're multiplying yourself in the
Yes.
lives of other people in a very profound way.
Yeah. Well, my 70s have been much more impactful than my 60s. I think, one of my mentors said, maybe I shared this with you earlier, but 0 to 25 is learning, 25 to 50 is doing, and 50 to 75 should be passing it on. And I
Mhm.
didn't start passing it on till I was probably in my late 60s, really passing it on.
Really passing it on, yeah.
Yes, and so now that I'm right in the thick of that, it is so fun and so fulfilling, it's not even funny, and you're
That's
seeing
so that is so good. Yeah, I feel it too. Love
Yeah,
every day what I do.
yeah,
Hey, what I'm gonna do once we get off, I'll send you, sometime today a transcript. That'll be like a
okay,
LinkedIn article, what I asked, what you said. I'll send you the audio on Spotify,
okay,
and I'll also send you the video on YouTube. I know I stumbled with a few words in the beginning. I'll edit that out,
oh,
so
yeah,
that won't even be
yeah,
there. But then you can use those assets any way you want.
for
And then,
sure,
if you ever come across a nonprofit who's sort of like they're a little bit flat and they want to see some more growth development, I love connecting with people and I just come in and I just want to do an assessment of where they're at, what's
Yes,
working, what's not working, and then
absolutely.
just have a dialogue
Yes,
around that. Actually, when I get off with you, I'm going to do that with a lady that is wanting to start something new. Yeah, I would welcome those opportunities.
okay, terrific. Well,
Right.
again, thank you.
My delight, and we'll let you go, and later in the day, it's either mow the lawn or walk in the woods or go for a walk with the dog.
That's right. I'm gonna get one of 'em in.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah.
You
Bye-bye.
bet. Bye.